So a few years ago I made a sun guide on this channel and it has been my most popular video. By far, it's still getting views to this day, and now that Champions is out, that guide's outdated. So today we're doing a Champions guide, and a lot has changed for Sun and Champions compared to in Scarlet and Violet, so let's get into it. So just a quick disclaimer, this is made during early Regulation MA. Many of the strategies here are going to be based on that meta. However, I want this guide to be long-lasting, so there are still going to be many tips and tricks that are going to be relevant in any format, and I'll talk more about some of the future formats later in the video. General overview, it's pretty simple. It boosts fire type damage by 50% and decreases water type moves by 50%. But it does have a secondary effect that it interacts with certain moves and abilities. For example, Solar Blade and Solar Beam are now 1-turn charges instead of 2-turn charges. Weather Ball becomes a fire type move and doubles in power. Moonlight, Synthesis, I think there's another move like that is just the same name or same move with a different name that increases the amount you're healed by. And those are just a few examples of the moves. There's also Hydro Steam, and also important to note that Hurricane and Thunder go down to 50% accuracy in the Sun. But it also works with some abilities too, like Photosynthesis. If you played Scarlet and Violet, you are well aware of this ability and how powerful it can be. Chlorophyll doubling the Pokemon speed, and then Solar Power just helping you deal a boatload of damage. And a few other abilities I wanted to mention are a Dry Skin. Actually, a Dry Skin is an ability you don't want to pair with Sun, because you'll lose HP when you're in the Sun. And then another ability is Harvest. Harvest is an ability that can be used outside of Sun. It will be a 50% chance of recovering a used berry if you're outside of Sun, but in Sun it is guaranteed every turn, which can make it really good for long-lasting Pokemon that want to stay in a while. I remember Wolf back in the day used it with Executor. So let's talk about who can set up the Sun, and mainly that is done through the ability Drought, which summons Sunny Day on Switch-In. And there are 3 Pokemon with Drought in the format. There's Ninetales, there's Torkoal, and then there's Mega Charizard Y, who gets it after Mega Evolving. And then I've got Whimsicott up here with an asterisk, because Whimsicott doesn't get Drought, but it does get Prankster Sunny Day, allowing for a manual option. It's definitely the least committed to the Sun archetype, but it can be used. So let's break down each of these Sunsetters. So Ninetales is the weakest of the Sunsetters. It's pretty obvious compared to Torkoal and Charizard Y. It's got 100 base speed, which sounds good. I've got it in the pros section, it moves fast, but then you also look over the cons section. I also have that it's fast there. And interestingly enough, weather Pokemon sometimes don't want to be as fast as they can be because weather activates based off speed in the Weather Wars, so the slower Pokemon will get their weather. Also notable cons of Ninetales is that it's physically frail, and compared to Torkoal and Charizard has a low damage output. It's only 81 special attack, and unlike Torkoal it does not get access to Eruption. But I would say the one pro it does have over Torkoal or Charizard is it's got actually a pretty decent supporting move pool. It gets Encore Disable, but that's not all. It gets Will-O-Wisp, it gets Snarl, it gets Fake Tears, it gets Mystical Fire, it gets Helping Hand. Just a lot of good, solid moves that can support your team. So if you were to run this, I'd maybe just use it more as a support mon that just also happens to set Sun rather than the Sun Sweeper. So here we've got some spreads that you can run on your Ninetales, and for items, I'd probably recommend either Charcoal or Focus Sash. And so both of these spreads I have taken from Jamie Boyd's videos. If you have not watched them, I will highly recommend it. I link the entire playlist in the description. He's doing one video for every Pokemon in Regulation MA, going over sets and strategies for them. And I tend to trust his spreads. He's a 3-time regional champion, so he knows what he's talking about. So I'd probably recommend the top spread there. It's Mystical Fire, Fake Tears, Will-O-Wisp, because it just works as a support set that can really lower the damage of opposing Pokemon. And then also can fake tears to support a strong special attacker like maybe a Venusaur or something else. And the bottom one is probably just if you're going like a Sash offensive set, but if you're running that, why not just run Charizard Y? So next up, we've got Torkoal. This was like the big one in the majority of non-restricted Scarlet and Violet regulations. And its pros: Trick Room Eruption. It goes burr. It does a lot of damage. And it's got good physical bulk. And unlike Ninetales, it is slow, so it will be winning the Weather Wars more often. But downside again, it's really slow. It's base 20. It's one of the slowest things in the game, and it's really reliant on Trick Room. Especially since some of its best items and partners are not currently in Champions. We do not have Indeedee for that Psychic Terrain. I know a lot of people loved Psy Spam with Eruption Torkoal on it. We do not have that right now. We also have no Eject Pack, which is kind of important because that limits what kind of sets you can run on that Torkoal. And no Choice Specs, so it won't be doing as much damage as it really wants to do. But it's got a good move pool. It's even got some good supporting move pool. It's usually a bit slower, bulkier of a supporter than Ninetales, with like Yawn and Iron Defense, Body Press, Clear Smog. So looking at sets, so right now, as you can see, 2 of its best items are not in Champion, and Choice Specs and Eject Pack, so you should probably just run Charcoal if you were going to run it in Regulation MA. Again, I take the spreads from Jamie Boyd, what can I say? Makes good spreads and has a soothing voice. So, really you're going to be wanting to run Eruption and Protect on this. And then the last 2 moves are kind of up to personal choice. Weather Ball is of course a good, strong, single target move, but it only really works in the sun. You could also go for Flamethrower or Heat Wave in that slot. Heat Wave works when you're not at full HP for that spread damage. And then that third slot's just going to be between something like Earth Power or Solar Beam, whatever coverage you want. And then the bottom spread isn't like, that's for a more supportive Torkoal. I wouldn't say use that moveset, that's just an example of some of the moves you can get. But like Will-O-Wisp, Beyond, Helping Hand, and then it can just spam Fissures to, I don't know, maybe cheese out some hits. But I'd say if you're running Torkoal right now, it's probably gonna be the Eruption set. But keep in mind, Trick Room is not as good as it was, especially also because there are no IVs anymore, so you can't go 0 IVs on speed, so Trick Room is a lot more difficult. You also don't have Terra, because I know a lot of people are used to the damage that Terra Fire Eruption could do, and that's just not the same level of damage it can do right now. Okay, and here's the big one. This is the one that's defining the format. Mega Charizard Y. So if you look at that stat spread, you'll see very apparently that it's a lot better than Ninetales or Torkoal's spreads. And it's got a secondary type of flying, which is a pro and a con. The immunity to ground is great, especially because you can Earthquake underneath it. The con is you're 4 times weak to rock, so you trade out not being weak to ground for being weaker to rock. And importantly, because it is your Mega, you get more control over when the weather is set because you have to manually activate the Mega Evolution rather than it just happening on switch-in. And now you'll see in the cons, I put in the cons, it uses its Mega Evolution. It's a bit of a con, but not really, because it just is one of the best Mega Evolutions anyway. You're not going to be like crying because you can't use Mega Beedrill and Mega Charizard on the same team. You're just going to want to use Mega Charizard because he's him. I guess another one of the cons I didn't put up there, but you can see its moveset is kind of lacking. But most of the times, you just want to be clicking those fire moves anyway. It used to have Tailwind, it no longer gets Tailwind, so it can't support the team as much, but still a very powerhouse of damage with that 159 special attack stat. And again, a Jamie Boyd spread here. I think this lives Garchomp Rock Slide. And it is, you're always going to be running Heat Wave. And then kind of like Torkoal, it's whatever your secondary fire type move is, whether that's Weather Ball, Flamethrower, Overheat. And then whether you're running like Solar Beam. Solar Beam's probably the best coverage for it. but you can maybe run like Dragon Pulse. I've seen Ancient Power on the ladder a bit. I think that's a bit gimmicky, but it beats other Charizard. Could also run Air Slash for another stab move, but it's kind of weak, and I think you're just better off with coverage anyway. So let's talk about our manual setter, Whimsicott. It's got Prankster Sunny Day, which means you can kind of which does mean you get more control over the weather. And it's not a fire type, so it doesn't share weaknesses. That's actually pretty big, because if you're running a team that wants to abuse the sun, and you have a lot of fire types, then you're going to have a lot of weaknesses to rock and ground, and Whimsicott does not have that problem. And the nice thing about Whimsicott is, you can run it with another Sun Setter. You can run Mega Charizard Y and Whimsicott, and run Sunny Day. Now, the thing about Whimsicott is, it itself does not benefit from the sun. It technically gets Chlorophyll as ability, but you just want to be running Prankster anyway. And while having manual sunsetting is an advantage, not being able to activate it on switch in can be tricky, because if you want to like switch in Whimsicott, you have to switch in Whimsicott and then you have to take another turn to set up the sun. And it can be faked out or taunted to stop the sun, whereas something like a Torkoal switching in does not have to deal with that. But I think the big problem with Whimsicott in this format right now is the lack of Covert Cloak, meaning it's very fake out vulnerable, and that means you want to run Protect, and that means you have to drop a move. So as you can see here, you want Moonblast and you need Moonblast and you need Tailwind. And then Sunny Day, if you want to go for the hard sun stuff, you might want Sunny Day. I've actually seen some teams just not even run the Sunny Day on the Whimsicott, but still run it with Charizard Y, because Encore is just such a good move that you want to have it. And you kind of want... So it's really up in the air whether you want Encore, Protect, or Sunny Day. You have to choose two of those moves. You can't have all three. And that's kind of the unfortunate thing about Whimsicott in this metagame. And then I've got two spreads. One is just a Sash spread. The other, I guess you could also run a Sash... The bottom one lives Aerodactyl Dual Wing Beat. Or you can run it with a Kova Berry to survive Aerodactyl Dual Wing Beat, but I think Focus Sash is just better because there's a lot of fire type damage. There's a Sneasler in the format. There's a lot of reasons you're going to be wanting to run that Focus Sash. And of course, Covert Cloak would be really nice on it if it was in the game. Alright, now that we've talked about our setters, let's talk about the actual Weather War and how you win it. So there's a few different scenarios I'm going to talk about. The first is when you're leading your weather setters, or you're switching it in after a KO, like if you knocked out one of your opponent's Pokemon and they knocked out one of yours, and then you're sending it out at the end of the turn. They both work the same way in these scenarios, and it's that the abilities activate in order of speed, and slower is better. You send out Ninetales, they send out Pelipper. That Ninetales is at 167 speed, while that Pelipper is at 117 speed. Sun will activate first, get overridden by Rain, meaning the Pelipper wins the Weather War there, since the Rain is up. However, on the other hand, if you're running Torkoal, Torkoal is slower than Pelipper with that 36 speed, therefore if you send them both out at the same time, it's gonna be the Sun. So another scenario is when you're doing a swap in the middle of the turn, where you're switching out one Pokemon and bringing in another one. And when switching weather setters in this way, the weather activation is based on the speed stat of the Pokemon you're switching out, and the speed stat of the weather setter itself does not matter. And so it's just like whoever switches out their Pokemon last wins the Weather War. So here we've got Incineroar switching into Ninetales and Sneasler switching into Pelipper. While normally Pelipper would win against Ninetales in the Weather War, since that Sneasler is switching out first, it's going to activate Rain first, then your Incineroar switches out, and then sets up Sun. So that's also something to consider, is how that works. So typically, weather teams can benefit from slow Pokemon that can take hits and then switch out. Now, how Megas factor into this? Because Mega Charizard Y's Drought only kicks in after you Mega Evolve. And sometimes delaying that Mega Evolution could help win you the Weather War, because if you're expecting them to switch in their Weather Setter eventually and you don't want to give up Weather Control, or if you're facing another Mega Weather Setter, it might be good to hold back on it because you don't have to set up the weather yet, and then you can you can late Mega and then ensure you have the weather. And Mega Evolution happens after switch-ins. So, for example, Charizard Y, it has the same speed as Ninetales at 167. It is faster than that Pelipper, but because it's activated on Mega Evolution rather than Switch-In, Charizard will win that. But we also got to consider there are other Megas that have weather abilities. Notably, I think the big ones you'll see are Mega Tyranitar and Mega Frostlass. And Mega Tyranitar is slower than Charizard. So when Charizard will Mega Evolve first, set up the Sun, then Tyranitar will set up its Sand afterwards. And speaking of Frostlass has a higher base speed than Charizard, though sometimes people will run it slower. I don't know how common this is, but it can be run slower to underspeed Charizard so they get their weather up. You are still hitting them super effectively for fire damage, so I'm not sure this tactic is the greatest idea, but I want you to be aware that it could happen. And you could also slow down your Charizard a little if you want to guarantee weather. So slow pivots can help ensure that your weather comes in after they potentially switch in their weather setter. So we're talking about Incineroar. Incineroar is naturally slow, so you can just switch it out and it will usually switch out last. But not only that, it also gets Parting Shot, which means you can do it in the middle of the turn, and then you can tank the hit and your weather setter will be fine and dandy. Also to note, this Pokemon isn't currently in the game, but Amoonguss also really pairs well with weather because it's slow, so it will be the last Pokemon to switch out. It likes switching out because of Regenerator, and it can just take hits. Another tip is to just be willing to switch out your weather setter if you think they have their weather setter in the back, because if you have your weather up, you might be tempted to just go and try and do a lot of damage, but then if they send out their weather, you're going to be in the sticky situation. They're going to have the control of the weather war, and the ball's going to be in their court. And just the third and final tip, apply pressure. You want to be applying pressure. Let's say you have your Charizard out, and they have Pelipper in the back, but if you're pairing that Charizard with something like a Rotom, you'll have that electric damage, and it'll be a lot riskier for them to send in their Pelipper because it could just take an electric type move or die. Likewise with Tyranitar, something like a Sneasler, some fighting type moves can really apply pressure, so even if they do switch in their weather setter, you're still taking the advantage there. The game's still going to be in your control. And we're going back to some of that manual weather with Whimsicott. It's not just Whimsicott. Whimsicott's really the one in this format that is the best, but in formats with legendaries, we've also seen Tornadus kind of take this role. And it's really good, especially at opposing... it's really good at countering opposing weathers. Because it always goes after ability activations, they send in a Pelipper, and then you Prankster Sunny Day, you win the weather war. But it does take a turn, it does take a move slot, and it can be taunted and fake out. And likewise, slow pivots do counter this. Because if you set up your Sunny Day and then they just Parting Shot out, they're just going to get the weather anyway. This is also something you can use to your advantage, like if they have a manual Rain Dance user, you can have something pivot out and then switch into your Sunsetter, and you will be good. And they will have wasted their turn clicking Rain Dance. Okay, who likes the Sun? As you can see, Incineroar is a Pokemon that likes the Sun, because it benefits from not taking a bunch of water type damage, and it's also got that slow pivot, and even though it's usually not used as the most offensive piece, it can do respectable damage with Flare Blitz in the Sun, but that's not really the only one. It is Incineroar. Incineroar is Mr. VGC, so of course it's going to be good on pretty much whatever team you put it on. But in general, like fire types, they like that damage boost. Pokemon with fire coverage like that damage boost. And they like not having to worry as much about water types. However, stacking too many fire types on a team can leave you weak to ground and rock, while also leaving you unable to hit rock, fire, water, and dragon. So it's important to also have types that cover for those. But ground and rock types are also great to use on sun teams because they're both weak to water. And therefore, now they're going to be neutral. especially Garchomp. Garchomp is a dragon type, so it already is neutral to water, but you would like your dragon type to resist water, and now it does with that Sun Up, and it just likes to spam Earthquake next to Charizard Y. And in terms of specific Sun sweepers, we've got Hisuian Typhlosion, I think, is the best non-Sun setter in the game that takes advantage of the Sun. It's not at its peak right now. It was much better in Regulation H when it had its Terra, and also right now it's Charizard Y is doing respectable damage anyway. You're usually just going to be wanting to sweep with Charizard Y anyway, so I think this would best be on a less committed Sun team where you're not as committed to Sun but have like Whimsicott on it. And you just want to run that with Choice Scarf, go max damage, go fast, Eruption all over the place. If you're doing it in closed team sheets, Frisk is the better ability just because it will give you some information about your opponent's team, but in open team sheets, just run Blaze, just on the off chance that you're at low health and that will come up. But so let's talk about Chlorophyll, because that is one of the abilities that really benefits from the Sun, which doubles the speed. So right now, the premier Chlorophyll Pokemon in Regulation MA is Venusaur, and usually it's run with Focus Sash. It could be Citrus Berry. I think Citrus Berry is potentially really good, especially with Dual Wing Beat being in the format. But you're just going to want to run Focus Sash because it will just allow you to do a lot of damage and move fast. And one of its main rules is using Sleep Powder, which is, unfortunately, 75% accurate. And they did nerf Sleep. In this metagame, you can no longer get a 3-turn Sleep. So it's a little weaker than it used to be, but still having that Grass-type coverage for hitting Water types, hitting Rock types that threaten Charizard, that is really good. So even without Sleep Powder, some people do ditch Sleep Powder in favor of like Earth Power as a coverage move. And then Poison damage is just nice because their Mega Floette exists. And it doesn't have to be Solar Beam. I feel like a lot of people are running Energy Ball just so they aren't as reliant on the Sun, because you don't want to ever put too many eggs in one basket in team building, or else if they have like a counter to that, you're just going to be screwed. Now, normally, Venusaur has more competition. Jumpluff and Lilligant Hisui are also two good Pokemon that get Chlorophyll, and I think do Venusaur's role better. They're not in MA right now, so Venusaur will make do for now. Jumpluff is a bit more of a supportive mon. It doesn't have good offenses, but it gets Rage Powder and Tailwind, which if you're using it as a support, like a sleep support Pokemon, that's really good, because you're just going to have fast Tailwind and the ability to sleep. Lilligant Hisui is also faster than Venusaur. It gets access to stronger moves. It's a physical attacker, unlike Venusaur. It gets Solar Blade, it gets Close Combat, and importantly, it also gets After You, which is really good paired with Torkoal, because you can just After You Eruption. And you're moving at Chlorophyll speed with Eruption Torkoal, and it can do a lot. But not in the game right now, so Venusaur. And just, I wanted to show off, these are all the Chlorophyll Pokemon in the game. Whimsicott, you're never going to want to run Chlorophyll, and Victory Bell is just worse Venusaur. Leafeon, it's faster than Venusaur, it doesn't get Sleep Powder, but it can hit decently hard, and it gets some good supporting moves. You're going to want to use Venusaur, but there might be a niche for Leafeon. And then Scovillain is a Fire type with Chlorophyll, which sounds good on paper. Its stats just aren't really there, its bulk isn't there, and it loses it once it Mega Evolves, so you can't use Mega Scovillain Chlorophyll. But having Chlorophyll Overheat in the Sun, that does seem appealing. It also gets Rage Powder for support. No sleep, like Leafeon, it doesn't get sleep, but there could be something with that. But again, 9 times out of 10, just run Venusaur. Solar Power. That's another ability that benefits from the Sun. It is a very strong ability, and it's balanced by the fact that it has terrible distribution, and most of the Pokemon that get it are pretty weak. So notably, I think the most common user of it is Charizard. And actually, a Choice Specs Charizard in the Sun will be doing more damage than Mega Charizard Y, I believe. You might notice a problem with that. First off, we have no choice specs in this format, so you're not going to be able to do that crazy level of damage with it. And if you're not running choice specs on a Solar Power Charizard, why bother at all? But even besides that, I still think even if choice specs were in the game, it would just be better to run Charizard Y, because a big part of team building is roll compression and making sure, because you could have something like a Torkoal Charizard and you're doing more damage, but you could have Mega Charizard Y and that only takes one Pokemon. Your Sunsetter is your sweeper, so you don't have to bring two fire types into the same game. And it's still doing, like, pretty respectable damage. I say pretty respectable damage like it's not Mega Charizard Y. It's doing a lot of damage. It's not one-shotting everything the way a Specs Solar Power Charizard would do, but it's just better to run Charizard Y. Another Solar Power Mon, Mega Houndoom. Again, it's not very good in this format because the best Sunsetter is another Mega. And you can't run two Megas, and you're just probably going to be wanting to run Charizard anyway. But if you really want the Dark type and are fine with running another Sunsetter, maybe Manual Sun Whimsicott, Houndoom does do more damage, and the Dark type can be nice, except into Sneasler, which means you can get close combated now. I could maybe see this one being paired with Ninetales with like a fake Tears Ninetales to really boost that Houndoom's damage, but probably don't use this. But if you want to use it, if you really love Houndoom, it's decent enough that you can get something going with it. And I want to talk about a sleeper pick here, because Heliolisk also gets Solar Power. Now, I'm going to be honest, this is never a Pokemon I'd recommend going out of your way to use. It is extremely frail. It needs that level of bulk to survive a Black Glass's Sucker Punch from King Gambit. But it is really fast with Solar Power. You're going to have to run Choice Scarf. I think Choice Scarf is the only reason you'd ever want to run this. And basically, you got to think of it like a Rotom. But it does a few good things that Rotom cannot do, which is, first of all, its Volt Switches can KO Basculegion. Scarf Rotom cannot KO Basculegion with Volt Switch. It's also a little faster than Rotom is, so it will actually outspeed Scarf Garchomp, and you can KO it with Hyper Beam. It has to be Hyper Beam. It cannot be Dragon Pulse, because Dragon Pulse will not OHKO Garchomp. Hyper Beam will OHKO Garchomp. If you're bringing this thing, you're kind of accepting you're trading one for one here. You're just going to want one big fast burst of damage. It's going to take one kill, and that's probably it, but that might be the most important kill of the game. Or you can just play it kind of like a Miraidon at home, and just constantly be pivoting out with Volt Switch. That way you don't take damage from Solar Power or damage from the opposing Pokemon. So again, this could be this perfect 6 Pokemon for your team. I wouldn't go out of my way for it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does well at a major tournament at some point. So now let's talk some rental teams, and I'm also going to have the Pokepaste in the description below for all of you Pokemon Showdown Andes out there. So these were all taken from the Grand Champions Festival, the tournament that Scraw just ran. And a few of these I have taken directly from what the people who play the team had posted. A few others I had to recreate the spreads myself, so they might not be as good of spreads. So this is Rogov's team that won the Grand Champions Festival, and it's a double mega team, so it's got both that Charizard Y and it's got that Floette. The idea is that Charizard's fire typing takes care of the steel typings that Floette doesn't like. And then you can see Garchomp loves to just spam Earthquake next to it. So yeah, this is just like a very strong team. You'll see it doesn't lean as into Sun as other ones. It's not as reliant on it because it is a double mega team. But honestly, that might be the way to go in this format, because really Charizard is the best Sun Pokemon in the game, and you can just have a perfectly fine Sun team with just Charizard. And here we've got Sableye VGC's team that he got 36th with. It's also got Whimsicott on it, but it doesn't have that sunny day because Encore is just that good. And this is a bit more of a faster version with that Scarf Garchomp and Sneasler. Now, this is one of the teams I recreated. It got like 2 12-3s in the Grand Champions Festival. And this is a bit more dedicated to that sun with that Venusaur. And it's also got Incineroar on it just to really help pivot around and do what you need to do with the sun. And again, Garchomp, really nice on those sun teams. And lastly, I wanted to include one Torkoal team for the Hard Trick Room enthusiasts out there. This one really leans into the Hard Trick Room with a Mega Kangaskhan to get those fake outs off. And just to be a strong attacker that can do decent damage in Trick Room. But meanwhile, you've also got that Hatterene and that Torkoal. No Psy Spam. You don't get the Expanding Force because there's no Psychic Terrain, but Hatterene's still really strong with Fairy Feather Dazzling Gleam. It's also interestingly got Close Combat White Herb Incineroar, I think kind of as a tech for other Incineroars. And that can be used as more of a Trick Room sweeper as well in the sun, because Flare Blitz, Sun Boosted Flare Blitz is going to do a lot of damage. Let's talk about the future. Let's talk beyond Regulation NA. I mentioned Lilligant and Jumpluff earlier, but there's a few more things I want to mention. So first off, let's talk about that Eject Pack Torkoal. So basically, Eject Pack switches you out whenever you have a stat drop. This is whether it is a stat drop from an opponent or from yourself. So notably, it punishes Incineroar because if they like to bring Incineroar into Sun teams since it resists fire moves. If they lead Incineroar, you lead Torkoal. You get the sun up, but then you also get a free switch out into another sweeper that can take advantage of that sun. And you kind of just want Torkoal out of there. Its main role is just to set up sun. And also, but if they don't lead Incineroar, you can still pivot out using Overheat, which will do a lot of damage, and switch you out at the end of the turn. Meaning you get your weather out and then you get out of there. And that is a really good way to run Torkoal, especially if you're not committing to Hard Trick Room. The Marco Silva Sun team that he won a lot of stuff with back in Regulation H was a great example of this Eject Pack Torkoal strategy. Protosynthesis. Yeah, we do not know when we're getting the Paradox Mons again, but when we do, you better believe they're going to like the sun. It boosts their highest stat by 30%. And 50% if it's speed. And I think there's 4 Pokemon in particular. Like, all the Paradox Pokemon do benefit, or the past Paradox Pokemon do benefit from Sun, but I think these 4 in particular, like, really get the benefits from Sun. So, of course, we've got Fluttermane. Fluttermane is just one of the best Pokemon of all time, even outside of Sun, and just gets even better inside of Sun, because then it can get that booster speed and hold a Focus Sash and do ridiculous damage. And it can Icy Wind for speed control, or it can just go for kills with Moonblast. Walking Wakes gets Hydro Steam. It kind of breaks the whole Sun mechanic a little by being a Water-type move that actually gets better in Sun rather than worse. The big problem with Walking Wake is that any format it is in, Fluttermane's also going to be there. And it does not like Fluttermane. So it either has to just commit to being a super powerful Hydro Steam attacker with Choice Specs, or go for that Assault Vest to try to live a hit from Fluttermane. Raging Bolt is again one of the best Pokemon of all time. It's very apparent as you can see how well it did in Scarlet and Violet. This one, not as much benefits from the sun, but it's still, like, it's Raging Bolt, and giving Raging Bolt a bit more damage is nice. And also, it gets access to Weather Ball, and it likes having that Fire-type coverage on, like, Assault Vest sets sometimes. Lastly, Brute Bonnet gets this one, rather than going for like an offense or a speed boost, it goes for a defense boost, and it basically becomes a really bulky Amoonguss. And it really shines in the restricted formats where its dark typing helps against Calyrex, and with its bulk, with the defense boost, it can survive hits from restricteds, which sometimes Amoonguss can't do. Speaking of restricteds, let's talk about those, because there are 2 more Sunsetters that are restricted. So basically, if you don't know restricteds, you can usually only use 1 or 2 of them in certain formats, but right now they're not in Regulation MA. So don't have to worry about them now, but they're very powerful. And so Groudon sets up the sun. In Scarlet and Violet, it was overshadowed by Koraidon a lot. But now that Koraidon doesn't have Terra, it might be a lot better as the Sun Setter. And the nice thing about it is a ground type, so you're not like doubling up on fire types, and you get that nice ground type coverage to hit those rock types. And meanwhile, you have 150 base attack, and you're in the sun, so your fire type moves with Groudon are still going to hit hard. Big problem though, Precipice Blade's only 85% accurate, which is its best ground move, but unfortunately, you'll get a lot of misses. You'll lose a lot of games to misses. But that's not where we end with Groudon, because now that Mega Evolution's back, Primal version's also probably coming back. And Primal Groudon, I think, just is really good. As you can see, it gets a nice boost to its stats, and it gets Desolate Land, which is basically Sun 2, the sequel, the improvement. Now, instead of water types being halved in damage, they just do nothing. They just fizzle out, they don't do anything. You cannot use water type moves in Desolate Land. And you can't reset, and you can't change the weather with like a move or a normal ability. Like no Pelipper switching in will stop it. The only way to turn off the Desolate Land is with Mega Rayquaza's Delta Stream or Kyogre's Primordial Seed. Notably, it is now a fire type. And while normally Fire Ground is 4 times weak to water, now you can't click a single water move, and one of your biggest weaknesses is gone. And now you've got 180 attack and Stab Fire moves, but it does get a lot in special attack too, and you might think that's a waste at first, but it does get Eruption, and now that it's Stab Fire type Eruption in Desolate Land, that can do a lot of damage provided you have the proper support for it to make sure it stays at full HP. And lastly, Koraidon, it was introduced in Scarlet and Violet. It won Worlds. It's a good Pokemon, but it's kind of reliant on that Terra. Because without Terra Fire, it's gonna die if a Fairy type even sneezes at it. And it's not getting Stab on its fire moves. It would still be pretty decent, all things considered, because like that speed stat, that attack stat, really nice. And Orichalcum Pulse just really leverages its damage by a ton. However, it also makes it a little more reliant on the sun rather than something like Groudon, because you're going to be doing less damage without it. And one last thing I want to talk about is Dynamax, since that's probably coming back at some point, since they seem to be wanting to put all the gimmicks in Pokemon Champions. So, Max Flare is basically whenever you Dynamax a Pokemon and then use a fire type move, it will turn into Max Flare. And the base power is based on the power of the move you're using. Like if you're using Ember, it's only going to be at that 90, but if you're using something more like Overheat, it's going to be at that 150 in the range. And if it hits a Pokemon, it will activate Sunny Day, and the nice thing is it goes through Protect. It deals 25% of its damage through Protect, which isn't as much damage as you want, but it will still set up the sun, making it a really good way to set up the sun. But notably, oh boy, we're talking about Charizard again. It's always Charizard. Of course, Game Freak's Golden Child is going to be talked about a lot. This is one situation where Solar Power Charizard is really good, because now that it gets the bulk from Dynamaxing, it can survive a lot more hits. Not to mention, G-Max Wildfire is a broken move. It has that high base power because of it being a max move, but also, for 4 turns, it'll deal 1/6 of your opponent's Pokemon's max HP unless they're a fire type. And that's just insane guaranteed damage that is basically unstoppable and can even if they have a Focus Sash to survive the first hit from G-Max Wildfire, they're just going to go down to the fire type damage at the end of the turn. And it's really good, especially when you're compounding it with Sun. It created the Deadly Rinya Sun team with Groudon, and Groudon had that ground coverage. Charizard had that fire type. Those are 2 good types to have together. Groudon sets up the sun for Charizard, and Charizard just goes wild. Anyways, that is the end of the presentation and the end of the video. If you like this or learned something, consider dropping a sub and a like. And Yeah, stay tuned for more Champions content.